The final stitch was a prayer, a tiny, almost invisible anchor knot tucked beneath a pearl bead, securing the last thread of a year-long devotion. My needle, an old silver one worn smooth by my mother's fingers, and then my own, finally rested. I held the wedding dress up to the soft afternoon light, filtering through my sewing room window, and for a moment, my breath caught. It wasn't just a dress. It was a story, a tapestry of ghosts and promises. My name is Beatrice Miller, and for 50 of my 75 years, sewing has been my language. It's how I've mended hearts, celebrated births, and mourned losses. But this project, this was the masterpiece for my granddaughter, Ashley, my only grandchild. The silk was the color of a dawn sky, a luminous ivory that seemed to drink the light. I had spent months sourcing it, a heavy Duchess satin that fell in a clean, timeless A-line, just as she'd sketched on a napkin for me months ago. The bodice was a delicate illusion of hand-tatted lace and seed pearls, each one sewn by my own hand, my thimble-worn finger tracing the path of a love I hoped she would find. But the true heart of the dress, the part that made my own heart ache with a beautiful, bittersweet nostalgia, was the lace. It wasn't new. It was the wide panel of gossamer netting and intricate floral patterns that had formed the train of my own wedding gown 48 years ago. When my Arthur had lifted my veil, his eyes, the color of a summer sky, had teared up at the sight of it. "You look like an angel, Bee," he'd whispered, his voice thick with an emotion that still echoed in this quiet room. Arthur was gone now, 10 years past, but in this room, surrounded by spools of thread and bolts of fabric, he was a constant, gentle presence. I'd carefully, painstakingly, removed the lace from my preserved gown, a sacrilegious act if it weren't for such a holy purpose. I spent weeks restoring it, mending infinitesimal breaks in the threads, replacing yellowed beads with new ones, breathing life back into a memory. I'd integrated it into the sleeves and the sweeping cathedral train of Ashley's dress. It was a bridge from my love story to hers. A piece of her grandfather, whom she barely remembered, would be walking her down the aisle. Ashley was a good girl, bright and full of life, though lately she seemed to be orbiting a different sun. Her mother, my daughter-in-law Diana, was that sun. Diana was polished. Everything about her was curated, from her bone-white furniture to her surgically precise smile. She was the wife of my son, Mark, a gentle soul who had long ago learned that the path of least resistance was the path to peace in his own home. Diana valued brands, status, and the opinions of people I'd never met. I valued craftsmanship, history, and the quiet weight of love. We were oil and water, existing in the same family, but never truly mixing. Still, for Ashley, I would do anything. I had poured my soul into this dress, imagining the look on her face when she saw it. I envisioned her gasp, the tears welling in her eyes, as she understood the legacy she was about to wear. The dress wasn't just a garment for a single day. It was an heirloom, a physical embodiment of our family's love, stitched together with a grandmother's hope. I laid the dress carefully across a mannequin I'd named after my own mother, Pearl. The lace train cascaded onto the floor, its patterns like frost on a window pane. I stepped back, my hands clasped over my chest. It was more beautiful than I had even imagined. Tomorrow they were coming, Ashley, Diana, and Mark, the final fitting. The unveiling. My heart swelled with a nervous, joyful anticipation. This dress was my love made visible. How could they not see it? How could they not feel it? Love made visible. The doorbell rang at precisely 2:00, a punctuality I knew came from Diana, not my son. I took one last, loving look at the dress, covered now by a pristine white garment bag in the center of my sewing room, and went to greet them. "Mom, it smells like lavender and memories in here, as always," Mark said, giving me a warm hug. He was a good man, my Mark, but he wore a permanent expression of mild apology, a side effect of his marriage. Diana glided in behind him, air kissing the space beside my cheek. Beatrice, the house is looking charming. In Diana's vocabulary, charming was a polite word for old. And then came Ashley, my granddaughter, looking radiant and stressed, a combination unique to brides-to-be. She hugged me tightly. Grandma B, I can't wait to see it. I'm so nervous. It's waiting for you, darling, I said, leading them back to my sanctuary. The room was tidy, the afternoon sun making dust motes dance in the air. The shrouded mannequin stood like a silent statue. Diana's eyes scanned the shelves of fabric, the pincushions bristling with needles, her lips pursed in a thin line of faint disapproval. All right, the moment of truth, I chirped, my hands trembling slightly as I reached for the zipper on the garment bag. Close your eyes, Ashley. She squeezed them shut, a giddy smile on her face. Mark looked on with proud affection. Diana stood with her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. I pulled the bag down in one smooth motion. Okay, open them. Ashley's eyes fluttered open. For a second, there was silence. I watched her face, waiting for the wave of emotion I had so vividly imagined. But it didn't come. Her smile faltered, replaced by a look of profound confusion. She took a step closer, her head tilted. Oh, she said. It was a small, flat sound, the sound of a balloon deflating. It's a lot of dress, Grandma, she said finally, her eyes fixed on the lace sleeves. Diana stepped forward, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. She circled the mannequin slowly, like a predator assessing its prey. Beatrice, she said, her voice smooth and cool, the workmanship is impressive. For a hobby, the backhanded compliment landed like a small stone in my gut. But darling, she said, turning to Ashley and placing a perfectly manicured hand on her shoulder. We have to be honest. It's frumpy. Frumpy. The word hung in the air, ugly and sharp. Ashley, emboldened by her mother's verdict, finally let her true feelings show. Her face crumpled. I'm sorry, Grandma. I can't wear this. It looks ancient. She gestured at the lace, the very heart of the gown. This old stuff, it looks like a dusty curtain. I'd be a laughingstock. People post everything on Instagram now, you know. My own heart felt like it was being shredded into ribbons. I couldn't speak. I looked at Mark, pleading with my eyes for him to intervene, to defend this labor of love, to defend me. He just shifted his weight, looking at the floor. Now, girls, he started weakly, but Diana cut him off. Mark, stay out of this. Ashley's feelings are valid, she said, her voice turning sharp. She turned back to me, her expression a practiced mask of sympathy. Beatrice, we know how much time you put into this, but we found a dress online, a Vera Wang. It's perfect, it's modern, and it's what Ashley wants. It's only $10,000. She paused, letting the number settle in the quiet room. We just need you to pay for it, she finished, as if it were the most reasonable request in the world. Think of it as your wedding gift to her. It would solve everything. I stared at her, then at my granddaughter, whose face was now a mixture of entitlement and relief. They hadn't just rejected the dress. They had rejected the story, the memories, the love. They had rejected Arthur. They had looked at a priceless piece of my heart and slapped a price tag on their own happiness, expecting me to foot the bill for the insult. The silence in the room was deafening, filled only by the sound of my own quiet, catastrophic heartbreak. They left soon after. The air in their wake was cold and still. Mark had tried to give me another hug on the way out, but I felt as stiff as the mannequin in his arms. I'm sorry, Mom, he'd whispered, but the words were hollow. He had stood by and watched his wife and daughter dismantle me, and his silence was the cruelest cut of all. I was alone now with the dress, the frumpy, ancient dress. I sank into my sewing chair, the familiar floral cushion doing nothing to soften the hard reality of the situation. I looked at the gown, no longer seeing a masterpiece, but a monument to my own foolishness. The light that had made it seem so luminous just an hour ago now seemed to mock it, highlighting the very details they had scorned. The antique lace seemed to yellow before my eyes, the pearls dulling with my tears. For a long time, I just sat there, letting the pain wash over me. It was a deep, aching sorrow that settled in my bones. Had I been so wrong? Was I just an old woman, out of touch with the modern world, clinging to sentimental things that no one else valued? Diana's words echoed in my head. For a hobby. As if my life's passion, the skill passed down from my mother, was nothing more than a quaint pastime, like knitting booties or collecting stamps. My phone buzzed on the cutting table. It was Mark. I ignored it. It buzzed again. A text message. I swiped the screen, my vision blurry. Mom, please understand. It's Ashley's big day. Her happiness is the most important thing. Diana and I can cover half the designer dress if you can cover the other half. It's just a dress. Just a dress. The words ignited something deep within me. The sorrow, which had been a cold, heavy blanket, began to smolder at the edges. It wasn't just a dress, it was my history. It was Arthur's memory. It was a year of my life, of my love, of my fading eyesight and aching fingers, all poured into something, for a girl who thought it was worthy of being traded for a factory-made status symbol. My gaze fell upon the lace on the train like a dusty curtain. I reached out and let the delicate fabric run through my fingers. I remembered the day Arthur and I had bought it from a tiny, cluttered shop in Brussels on our honeymoon. The old woman who ran the shop had told us its story. She said it was a rare pattern, a piece of Point de Gaze lace from the late 19th century, made by nuns in a convent that no longer existed. At the time, we were just two young people in love, buying a beautiful souvenir. We didn't care about its provenance, only its beauty. Over the years, my professional curiosity had grown. I'd read books on antique textiles, always wondering about that old woman's story. Was it true? The lace was certainly finer, more intricate than anything I had ever worked with. The floral patterns were breathtakingly complex, with a three-dimensional quality I'd never seen replicated. The smoldering ember of my sorrow now flared into a hot, cleansing anger. They didn't see its value. Fine. Perhaps it was time to find out what its value really was. Not its sentimental value. That, I now knew, was worthless to them. I was thinking of a different kind of value. The kind Diana, with her talk of $10,000 dresses, would understand perfectly. My hand, no longer trembling with grief, but steady with resolve, reached for my old rotary phone. I scrolled through the worn pages of my address book, searching for a name I hadn't needed in years. He was an old colleague, a man who had left the world of fashion for the hallowed halls of academia and museums, a man who would know if this lace was just a dusty curtain or something much, much more. Dr. Alistair Finch was a man who spoke of textiles the way a priest speaks of relics. We had known each other for 30 years, back when he was a curator for the Fashion Institute, and I was occasionally called upon for my expertise in restoring historical garments. He was now the head of the textile and costume department at one of the country's most prestigious museums. If anyone could see the truth in these threads, it was Alistair. When I called him, his voice was a warm, familiar baritone, laced with a British accent that had softened but never disappeared over his years in America. Beatrice, my dear, what a delightful surprise. To what do I owe the pleasure? I explained the situation, trying to keep the tremor of emotion out of my voice. I told him about the dress, the lace, and its supposed origins. I didn't mention my granddaughter. I framed it as a simple query, an old seamstress's curiosity about a piece she'd held onto for decades. Point de gaze, you say, from the 1880s? My dear Beatrice, that would be quite the find, he said. His interest piqued. Most pieces from that era are in tatters or are small fragments. To have a piece large enough for a wedding train, that would be extraordinary. May I see it? He came the next afternoon. Alistair was a tall, silver-haired man with kind eyes that lit up with intellectual fervor behind his bifocals. He arrived with a leather satchel containing a magnifying glass, white cotton gloves, and an air of gentle authority. I led him into the sewing room, where the dress still stood on its mannequin, a silent, beautiful defendant awaiting judgment. I felt a pang of anxiety. What if I was wrong? What if Ashley and Diana were right, and it was just a pretty but worthless piece of old fabric? Alistair didn't say a word at first. He walked slowly around the dress, his hands clasped behind his back. Then he stopped in front of the train. He carefully opened his satchel and pulled on the white gloves. "May I?" he asked softly. I nodded, my heart hammering against my ribs. He lifted the edge of the train, his touch impossibly delicate. He brought the magnifying glass to his eye and leaned in close, examining the complex web of threads. The room was utterly silent for a full 5 minutes. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall and my own ragged breathing. Finally, he straightened up, removing the magnifying glass from his eye. He looked not at the dress, but at me. His face was filled with a profound, unadulterated awe. "My God, Beatrice," he whispered, his voice hushed with reverence. "It's real. This isn't just point to gaze. This is a rose to gaze variation, one of the most sought after and difficult patterns. Look here." He pointed to a specific part of the lace. "See this three-dimensional quality of the rose petals? The sheer number of stitches in this tiny area? This is the work of a master, or more likely, a team of masters. This wasn't made for a merchant's wife. This was likely commissioned for European royalty." He stepped back again, his eyes scanning the entire length of the lace. "And the condition? It's immaculate. Beatrice, you haven't just preserved a piece of lace. You have preserved a masterpiece of lost art. There is nothing like this, of this size and quality, in our collection. I dare say there is nothing like it in any collection in North America." I felt the floor tilt beneath my feet. A wave of dizziness, of pure, unadulterated vindication washed over me. "Alistair," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "what is it worth?" He took a deep breath, his eyes still fixed on the dress. "To a collector? To a museum? Authenticated and with its provenance. Beatrice, you are in possession of a textile worth, at a conservative estimate, well over $100,000. He paused, then looked me straight in the eye. "Frankly, to the right institution, it could be considerably more. $100,000. The number seemed unreal, absurd. I thought of the Vera Wang dress. $10,000. A pittance, a joke. They had called it a dusty curtain. They had called it ancient and frumpy, and they were right. It was ancient, and it was about to make their modern, fashionable world look very, very small. The decision was surprisingly easy. The moment Alistair spoke that number, the path forward became clear, as if a fog had lifted. My grief for the relationship I thought I had with my granddaughter was still there, a dull ache in my chest, but it was now overlaid with a cold, clear sense of purpose. They had refused a gift of love, so I would give them a lesson in value. "The museum would be honored to acquire it, Beatrice," Alistair said gently, sensing the shift in me. We would treat it with the reverence it deserves. It would be the centerpiece of our 19th century European collection. We could even name the donation in your honor or in your husband's. In mine, I said, the words coming out firmer than I expected. The donation will be in my name. Beatrice Miller. Over the next few days, a quiet, efficient process unfolded. 2 conservators from the museum arrived, their hushed tones and delicate handling a stark contrast to my family's careless dismissal. They documented every inch of the dress with professional cameras, their soft flashes illuminating the details Diana and Ashley had overlooked. They spoke in acronyms and technical terms, but their meaning was clear. They were in the presence of greatness. Watching them work, I felt a strange sense of detachment. It was as if I were watching a scene from a movie. They carefully removed my hand-stitched bodice from the antique lace skirt and train, separating my work from the historical artifact. They would preserve my dress as well, they assured me, as an example of modern craftsmanship integrating a historical piece. But the lace was the true prize. They packed the lace in a custom-built, acid-free archival box, laying it on a bed of unbleached cotton as if tucking a beloved child into bed. When they carried the box out of my home, I felt not a pang of loss, but a sense of rightness. The lace was moving on to a place where it would be understood, appreciated, and celebrated. It was being rescued. A week later, a courier delivered a large, stiff envelope. Inside were the final documents and a check. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Ashley used to sit as a little girl, drawing pictures while I baked cookies. I stared at the check, made out to Beatrice Miller. The amount was for $125,000. The museum's board, upon seeing the photographs and Alistair's report, had insisted on a higher valuation. I ran my thumb over the embossed seal of the museum, the crisp paper cool beneath my skin. This wasn't just money. It was validation. It was proof. It was the armor I would wear to the wedding. My phone had been buzzing intermittently all week. Voicemails from Mark asking if I was okay. Texts from Diana, not asking, but reminding me that the Vera Wang dress had been ordered and the first payment was due. Let me know when you've sent the funds, Beatrice. We don't want any unpleasantness. I ignored them all. I had my own preparations to make. I went to the bank and deposited the check. Then I went to a specialty print shop with a digital file Alistair had sent me. It was a high-resolution photograph of the lace, beautifully lit and displayed against black velvet. I had them print a perfect 5x7 copy on glossy, expensive cardstock. The day before the wedding, I received another, smaller envelope from the museum. Inside was a heavy, cream-colored card. It was a formal invitation to the unveiling of the new exhibit in 3 months' time, and tucked inside was a small, brass plaque, a duplicate of the one that would be mounted next to the display. I read the elegant engraved script, Point de Gaze, Rose de Gaze panel, circa 1885 Belgian, a masterpiece of lost lace-making artistry, donated by Beatrice Miller. I placed the photograph and the plaque into a simple, elegant envelope. Then I wrote a check from my personal account. I made it out to Ashley for $100, enough for a nice toaster. I folded it carefully and slipped it into the envelope alongside the other items. The gift was ready. All that was left was the delivery. The week of the wedding was the quietest of my life. The constant hum of the sewing machine was absent, leaving a void that was filled only by the ticking of the clock and the beating of my own resolute heart. My home, usually a place of creative chaos, felt serene, expectant. I was no longer a heartbroken grandmother. I was a woman preparing for battle. Diana's texts became more frequent, their tone shifting from condescendingly sweet to impatiently sharp. Beatrice, the final payment for the dress is due tomorrow. I need to know your intentions. Ashley is very stressed. It's not fair to leave this hanging over her head. Mark tells me you won't answer his calls. This is very childish. Please send the transfer confirmation. I read each message with a placid expression and then deleted it. My silence was a weapon, and it was clearly unnerving her. She was a woman who needed to be in control, and for the first time, I had taken that control away from her. Let her wonder. Let her worry. Let them think I was scrambling to sell stocks or take out a loan. Let them picture me as a feeble old woman, flustered and defeated. Their underestimation of me had always been their greatest weakness. It was now my greatest strength. On the morning of the wedding, I chose my outfit with deliberate care. A simple but beautifully cut navy blue dress of my own making, a string of my mother's pearls, and sensible heels. I was not aiming for glamour or attention. I was aiming for dignity. I was a guest at a celebration, but I was also an executor of a certain kind of justice. I drove to the venue, a lavish country club Diana had chosen, with its manicured lawns and sweeping views of the valley. The place dripped with money, both old and new. It was a perfect stage for the drama about to unfold. As I walked through the opulent lobby, I saw the kind of people Diana aspired to be. Women in designer dresses making small talk, men in tailored suits discussing portfolios. They all had the same look of polished, performative contentment. I found my seat in the ceremony hall and sat quietly, observing. Mark looked nervous, constantly adjusting his tie. Diana was in her element, flitting from guest to guest, a queen in her court. When Ashley appeared at the end of the aisle, there was a collective gasp from the crowd. She was wearing the Vera Wang dress. It was a dress, a cloud of white tulle and strategically placed crystals, certainly expensive, certainly modern. But it had no soul. It was a costume, designed to be photographed, a generic statement of wealth. She looked beautiful, as any young bride does, but there was no story in the fabric, no history in the seams. She looked like every other bride in every other bridal magazine. I felt a pang, not of anger, but of pity. She had no idea what she had thrown away. The reception was even grander, held in a ballroom with chandeliers that looked like frozen waterfalls. During dinner, I was polite to my table mates, making small talk about the weather and the lovely floral arrangements. I ate my chicken, I sipped my water, and I waited. The perfect moment came, as I knew it would, during the gift opening, which Diana insisted on doing publicly at a table near the dance floor. It was a vulgar display, but it suited my purposes perfectly. Ashley and her new husband, Evan, sat surrounded by a mountain of boxes from high-end department stores. I waited until there was a lull, a moment between a silver ice bucket and a set of crystal champagne flutes. Then I stood up, my simple envelope in hand, and walked towards the head table. A few people watched me, curious. Diana saw me coming, and a small, triumphant smirk touched her lips. She thought her campaign of harassment had worked. She thought this envelope contained her $10,000. Her ignorance was bliss, and it was about to end. I approached the table with a calm, steady gait. Ashley looked up, her face flushed with excitement and champagne. Evan, her new husband, a pleasant-looking young man who seemed perpetually bewildered by the opulence around him, gave me a polite smile. "Grandma B," Ashley said, her voice a little loud. "You got us a card." "Something like that, dear," I replied, my voice even. Diana, who was standing proprietarily behind her daughter, leaned in. "Beatrice, so glad you could make it right," she whispered, her eyes gleaming with avarice. I ignored her completely, my focus entirely on Ashley. I handed her the envelope. "For you, darling, with all my love." Her fingers, adorned with a brand new wedding band and a diamond the size of a molar, fumbled with the seal. She pulled out the contents. Her eyes first fell on the check. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. A flicker of confusion. $100. It was a respectable gift, but not what she and her mother had been expecting. Not by a long shot. Then she saw the photograph. Her brow furrowed. She stared at the glossy image of the lace, my lace, displayed like a royal treasure against a backdrop of pure black. Her eyes moved to the small brass plaque I had tucked in with it. She read the words, her lips moving silently. Point de Gaze, Rose de Gaze panel, circa 1885. Donated by Beatrice Miller. The color drained from her face. I watched as the sequence of emotions I had anticipated played out in high definition. Confusion gave way to dawning comprehension. Comprehension morphed into disbelief. And finally, disbelief shattered, leaving behind the stark, ugly face of horror. Her hand, the one holding the photo, began to tremble. What is this?" she stammered, looking up at me, her eyes wide with panic. Diana, sensing that something was wrong, snatched the photo and the plaque from her daughter's hand. She read the plaque, her perfectly lipsticked mouth falling open. She looked from the photo to me, her eyes narrowing into venomous slits. The mask of the gracious hostess fell away, revealing the raw, grasping greed beneath. "What have you done?" she hissed, her voice a low, dangerous whisper that was somehow more chilling than a shout. Several guests at the nearby tables had noticed the shift in atmosphere. The cheerful chatter began to die down as people turned to look at the drama unfolding at the head table. I met Diana's furious gaze without flinching. I raised my voice just enough to be heard by those closest to us, my tone cool and clear as ice. "You said the dress was ancient," I said, my words dropping into the growing silence. "You were right. It's a 19th century museum piece." I turned my gaze to my granddaughter, who was now staring at the $10,000 dress she was wearing as if it were on fire. "You said my dress made you look like a laughingstock," I continued, "and you demanded a dress with a price tag. Well, the world's leading textile experts put a price tag on my dress. It seems you had a choice between a one-of-a-kind work of art worth over $100,000 and that very common designer dress you're wearing now." A collective gasp went through the nearby tables. The gossip was starting to ripple outward through the ballroom like a shockwave. "You didn't want a grandmother's love," I said, my voice softening with a genuine sadness that surprised me. "You wanted something you could buy. So I sold the love, and I gave you the money." I gestured to the $100 check. "Well, a small portion of it. A finder's fee, perhaps." Ashley burst into tears, a loud, ugly sob that was anything but photogenic. Evan was looking back and forth between the photo, his crying bride, and me, his face a perfect mask of confusion. But it was Diana's reaction that was the most telling. It wasn't sadness, it wasn't remorse. It was pure, unadulterated fury, the fury of a con artist who has just been outplayed. The public humiliation was burning her alive, and I wasn't finished yet. Diana's face was a mottled, furious red beneath her expensive foundation. Diana's face, "How could you do this to your own family?" she seethed, stepping towards me. "How could you humiliate Ashley on her wedding day?" "Humiliate her?" I responded, my voice remaining level, cutting through her histrionics. "I believe you and she handled that yourselves, about 2 weeks ago, in my sewing room. You taught her that my love had a price, Diana. You taught her that history is worthless and only brand names matter. I simply let the world show you how wrong you were. This is not a punishment. This is an education." My son, Mark, finally spurred to action, rushed over. "Mom, what's going on? What is this?" I looked at him. my son who had stood by and let this happen, and the last of my softness hardened. This is a consequence, Mark, a consequence of you choosing your wife's greed over your mother's heart. You told me it was just a dress. It turns out it was the down payment on a new house. The words landed like a physical blow. Mark staggered back, looking at his wife and daughter with new, horrified eyes. The truth of what they had thrown away, what he had allowed them to throw away, was crashing down on him. The ballroom was now buzzing. The story was spreading like wildfire, passed in excited whispers from table to table. I could see the looks on the faces of Diana's so-called friends, not sympathy, but a delicious, rapturous schadenfreude. A social climber like Diana, who lived and died by appearances, had just committed the ultimate sin. She had revealed herself to be ignorant, grasping, and utterly devoid of class. She hadn't just lost a small fortune, she had lost face. In her world, that was a fate worse than bankruptcy. Ashley was still sobbing, her makeup running in black streaks down her face, her perfect Vera Wang dress, now just a symbol of her own shallow choice. Her wedding day, the day that was supposed to be her social media triumph, was now a catastrophe. Every photo would be a reminder of her monumental, publicly witnessed mistake. I had done what I came to do. There was nothing left to say. I turned away from the wreckage of the head table and walked, not with anger or triumph, but with a profound and quiet sense of release. I walked past the staring guests, past the open-mouthed waiters, and out of the grand ballroom. I didn't look back. The cool night air felt clean on my face. I got in my car and drove away from the country club, leaving the frantic, glittering chaos behind me. In the end, I knew the money was the least important part of the equation. I used a portion of it to set up a scholarship fund in Arthur's name at the local design school, a fund for young artisans who chose history and craftsmanship over fleeting trends. The rest would ensure I would live my remaining years in comfort and independence. I had lost a granddaughter and perhaps a son. That was a grief I would carry with me, but I had found something else in its place, the unshakable knowledge of my own worth. It was a value that couldn't be stitched into a dress, appraised by an expert, or sold to the highest bidder. It was the quiet, resilient strength of a woman who had finally learned to stop giving pieces of her heart to people who didn't know how to hold it. And that was a masterpiece all its own.